When you're looking at AI adoption in AEC today, where are firms getting it wrong, and why does starting with tools instead of process create problems?
I often try to look back at where I got things wrong, and I think there's a really good analogy here, right? And prior to AI, at Sullivan Engineering, where we were trying to find a good CRM and field reporting software application to use, we often pulled one or two team members aside and said, hey, can you look at this, right? And we had this guy, Jimmy, on our team.
Most AEC firms adopting AI is about choosing the right tools, but what if the real competitive advantage has nothing to do with the technology at all? Many firms are investing in technology without rethinking the processes and operating models underneath it, and that disconnect is where momentum stalls. Today, we're exploring why starting with tools instead of process design may be the biggest mistake firms are making. I'll be speaking with Brian Sullivan, PE, founder and CEO of Gigbench and co-founder of Trinivate Advisors. With more than 2 decades in the AEC industry, Brian has led teams, scaled businesses, and worked at the intersection of people, process, and technology to build systems that actually work in practice. We'll speak about where AI adoption is going wrong, what capacity thinking means compared to traditional headcount planning, and what an adaptable operating model really looks like when AI is embedded directly into everyday workflows. If you're a firm leader looking to strengthen performance without simply adding more overhead or more software, this conversation will challenge how you think about growth, talent, and technology. Stay with us as we break down what it actually takes to build an AEC firm ready for what's next. Before we jump in, I wanted to tell you about AEC PM Connect, where AEC professionals explore how technology and innovation can transform project management, performance, and leadership. The event will take place on June 10th, 2026 at the Forest Gate Country Club in New Jersey. You can register now at aecpmconnect.com, and I hope to see you there. With that, let's jump into today's episode. It's now time for our conversation of the week with Brian Sullivan. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to join the show, and welcome.
Nick, thanks for having me on. It's an honor.
Absolutely. And I see you've got a very interesting background. I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 things. So I'm sure we'll step through and talk about each of them as we go on here. But let's get kicked off because I'm really excited for this conversation. So our first question for you today, Brian. So what first drew you into the AEC world? And then how has your journey evolved from an engineer, right? Because you are a PE, to what you do today as a founder and advisor?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I think when I was younger, trying to figure out what I want to do, I tried to figure out how I could emulate my dad as much as possible. And although he came over from Ireland, so he didn't have a formal college education, but he worked for Con Edison, the utility company in New York. And his role would have most closely aligned with what an engineer does. And when I was in high school trying to figure it out, I was, better at science and math than I was at English and history. And so I kind of naturally gravitated towards engineering. And with my dad's friendly nudge, I decided to pursue engineering in school and go down that path. And, it was a fun path to be on. As I went through my career coming out of school, I didn't really have the confidence to think that, I could be an actual engineer working for an engineering firm. So I first took a step into the construction side of the industry, working as an engineer for the construction side. I don't know why I thought that would be easier or more friendly to someone who didn't have the confidence to be an engineer. It definitely wasn't easier, that's for sure. But I went into the construction side of it, really enjoyed it, then decided I would try out the engineering side, did a little bit of construction management, and then went to work for an engineering firm based out of Queens, where I was born and raised. And on that side, for that firm, it was a firm that did building envelope restoration. I realized that not everything for engineering was running calculations, sitting in office, 2 things that I'm not very good at. They're not my strengths. Sitting still is not a strength of mine. Crunching numbers is not a strength of mine either. But I got to be out in the field a lot. I got to, just think on my feet a good bit, use experience, my own experience, as well as the veterans in our office use their experience. And I really, really enjoyed that. So I started to rise up as a leader within that firm and quickly recognized that I loved that more than even doing the engineering. I love the management side of it. I loved the opportunity to mentor younger team members, even though I was quite young myself. So I decided I would try the entrepreneurial route and start my own firm and start Sullivan Engineering back in 2010 as I was 35 years old. went back to doing engineering on a day-to-day basis, obviously to start the firm as a firm of one, and then bringing in an admin and then starting to grow the team. Again, realized how much I loved leading a team, managing a team, getting into entrepreneurship and figuring that out was really where I felt the natural itch and my natural calling. I like to joke that, I was a good engineer, but never really had that love or greatness for it. But, I think my calling is more towards entrepreneurship.
And that's a great way to get us kicked off, Brian. So for anyone in the audience that's listening, right, if you're an engineer and you feel like maybe you're not in the right seat, which I know you talk about a lot, Brian, right person, right seat, there is a path for you, even if you aren't that, let's say, right, that really technical person who loves it. There are other opportunities. And so you're back, right, Brian? You've got your book, Entrepreneurial Trinity. Speaking of entrepreneurship, might tell us a little bit about that and how you came to writing a book. So just, I read it. I really love it. That's one of the ways we've connected, Brian. But for the audience who hasn't, could you just give them a brief synopsis of what it's all about?
Yeah, absolutely. My wife and I wrote the book during a sabbatical year. So after I sold Sullivan Engineering in 2021, I stayed on with the parent company for 2 years and then took a sabbatical in 2024. And my wife and I felt called to write just a story of our journey of starting and growing a business while building a strong family with an abundant faith. And in it, we share the lessons that I learned along the way. And that's the polite way of saying all the mistakes I made to allow others to try to avoid those mistakes. They'll make the mistakes of their own, but that's fine. If they can avoid my mistakes, hopefully that will be very helpful. And then we share Mary Jo's perspective of what life was like, with the children in the house, how things were, because I beat myself up a lot about the time I put into starting the business and the time I was away from the home. And then she's sharing her perspective on what that looked like and how it felt on her side of it, which I was probably beating myself up more than I should have because she doesn't look at it nearly as negatively as I do. She doesn't criticize me nearly as much as I do.
And that is a great lead into my next question. So I see on your TV screen, Brian, you've got two logos, which we'll get into a second here. So now this journey has taken you from, right, like someone coming out of college with an engineering degree lacking an amount of confidence, right? Built that up through working a job in engineering, building envelope and restoration, right? Starting your own firm, we're talking 15, 16 years ago. It's gotten you to the point where you are today. So now everybody's favorite topic, AI. So I think there's a chain of events here that's led you to where you are today. So I'm going to ask this first question and then we'll get into more of the details. But when you're looking at AI adoption in AEC today, where are firms getting it wrong? And why does starting with tools instead of process create problems?
Yeah, such a good question, Nick. I often try to look back at where I got things wrong, and I think there's a really good analogy here, right? And prior to AI, at Sullivan Engineering, where we were trying to find a good CRM and field reporting software application to use, we often pulled one or two team members aside and said, "Hey, can you look at this?" Right? And we had this guy Jimmy on our team who was awesome, and I would go to Jimmy and say, "Hey, can you look into this? Can you look into that?" And I remember we put some of our brighter team members around a table and said, "Hey, we want to talk about field reporting software and what we can use and what we should do." And I, of course, started talking first because that's what I do, right? And I started sharing with the team that, it would be really nice to have something when we're out in the field where we have an iPad that we can use for field reporting software and we can take our pictures with our digital camera and then, easily upload it in a quick way to the iPad and go from there. And my head of operations very politely leaned over to me and said, "We haven't used digital cameras in 3 years. Nobody even has one." And I was kind of like, "Oh, all right, let me sit back and let you guys have this conversation," because it dawned on me I hadn't been out in the field doing that role in probably 4 or 5 years. But in my mind, I felt like I was doing it yesterday, right? And I think in many of the conversations I've had with firm owners, they are trying to tell us what their team wants and needs. And they're often 3 degrees removed from the team, maybe 4, 5, 6 degrees removed from the team. They might be a couple of years, they might be a couple of decades removed from actually doing the role. So I think one of the things that we get wrong as founders and leaders is assuming that the role is still being done the way that we used to do it and assuming that we know what the team wants. and what's going to solve their pain point. So to that second question, Nick, I think we go looking for the tool that's going to solve the issue before we fully understand what the issue is. So I think, what I love to see is when, having conversations with firms and they're bringing in their team members that are on the front lines, they're bringing in the middle management that's also hearing all of the headaches and all having a collaborative conversation about what their biggest pain point is. And then let's work on solving that. Because the second part of it that always comes an issue is adoption, right? And, is the team going to actually use the software that roll out? Well, if you're solving a real pain point for them, then yes, they'll use it, right? If you're solving a pain point for leadership, they might need to be convinced on to use it, right? Some of them will just use it because leadership asked, but most people, they're human, right? What's in it for me? How is this going to solve my day-to-day issue? Because ultimately, any new software, any new technology is additional work up front. So what's the buy-in, right?
And it always comes back to people. Like, no matter how sophisticated we get technologically or otherwise, it's still all about people in this business.
Absolutely. It's very much a people-first industry, and it will be for a long time to come, regardless of how fast technology is moving. It's still people on the client side, people on our side. So, yeah, it's a people-first industry for sure.
And speaking of people, so right, like the people that make the engine run, like the men and women that are out in the field every day, right, that produce the work product that clients ultimately buy. So let's talk about like that from like the firm owner's perspective. So we've talked in the past a little bit, Brian, about this term capacity thinking versus traditional headcount planning in project-based AEC firms. So for the audience who maybe hasn't heard this term, could you just elaborate on what it is in that line of thinking you've been down?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, simplest way using round numbers, the traditional model for engineering firms, the way I did it, right? If you want to predict revenue for next year, you assume a certain number. If that's $200,000 per billable employee is going to come in the door, right? And so, okay, if we want to do 5 million in revenue, we need 25 billable employees, and that's how we're going to get to 5 million in revenue, as opposed to the capacity thinking of, okay, how can we have our team be more efficient and with 25 people do 6 million in revenue? Or this is the revenue we want to shoot for. Let's think of how we get there and then figure out the number of people that we would need to get there and use technology or innovation. Nick, I've heard you use the word a lot, innovation, and you're shifting my mindset from using technology to using innovation, because sometimes you could just innovate a process to become much more efficient. Sometimes, as you and I have talked about, you can have people work in different roles where they can really knock it out of the park by putting them in a role that they love doing and are great at, and just be much more efficient in what they're doing. And I think efficiency has a bad rap because it's often thought of, how do we get our team to do more? And it's not necessarily that, right? It's to do more of the work that they love in a way that they can get it done faster and easier, right? And come back to work with more energy. I often found that I was the least efficient when I was doing work that I did not love doing, right? It would just drag on. I still find myself the least efficient. I said that in past tense, right? But I still find myself the least efficient when I'm doing work that I don't love doing, right? It just drags on. It takes a lot longer. I get up, I take more breaks, I wander over, get more snacks when I'm doing work I don't love, right? So figuring out from a capacity perspective what your team can get done with the people that you have, because ultimately it's a people issue. And as we know, there is a people shortage in our industry and will be for a while to come. So how do we take the team that we have that we presumably is mostly rock stars, and how do we get them to be able to do the work that they want to do and figure out what we can get rid of and then potentially do more revenue with the same amount of people?
And I think there's a couple of themes here, Brian, that we're going to try to connect the dots on. So we'll throw back to what we were just talking about 5-10 minutes ago. So right person, right seat. And we've talked about this a lot, where it's just getting the right person doing the right tasks. And that alone can really do a lot for efficiency and productivity and give that person a better outlook on their work.
100%, Nick. And I think it's really important and that comes from that Right People, Right Seat, as you know, comes from Gino Wickman's book on traction and the entrepreneurial operating system, which when we first adapted it in our office, initially I was embarrassed to say, now I lean fully into it. It took me a long time to admit that I don't love doing technical review of documents. And I was not good at it. Not even not great at it. I was just not good at it. But I did it because I was Brian Sullivan of Sullivan Engineering, and I felt like that was the role I should do. So I would do it late at night. I would do it last thing of the day. So it dragged. It slowed down. It was definitely a bottleneck for our team. But I was reluctant to give it up, partly because I felt like I needed to do it as Brian Sullivan of Sullivan Engineering. And I
Hmm.
also felt like now this sounds terrible, it's very egotistical, but if I didn't like doing it, no one would like doing it. So I was falling on the sword to do it because in my mind, who would really like doing technical review of documents? Lo and behold, we had someone on our team named Adam McManus, and then we brought on Mike Lopez. And both of those guys love doing it and are absolutely great at it. So the process got much faster by me giving it to them. I was able to
Now,
offboard it to them. They got to do work that they love. Adam got to move to a different state with his family because he didn't need to be in our office to be able to do it. So we unlocked that potential for him and his
this
family. And then I was able to do more of the work that I love, which was more working with the people on our team, more in a sales capacity, bring in more revenue, hire great people for the team. So as you can see, I mean, we quickly unlocked a lot of efficiency and increased capacity very quickly just by making that change within the office. We didn't add headcount when we asked Adam to take over technical review documents. The same headcount. We just shifted who was doing what work. It got done much faster, and he is miles ahead of me on doing it. Not just better at me, we're in different leagues on the ability to review. So that was just a great unlock that I think a lot of us miss, and I was missing for probably the first 7 years of Sullivan Engineering.
and Brian, speaking of headcount, and I'll throw back to an event we were at last year. So New York City Metro IBEC chapter, so International Institute of Building and Closure Consultants, for anyone that's not familiar with it. And a keynote was given by our colleague, Mike Ramos, who I also interviewed maybe 20, 25 episodes ago. And the one
Such
thing
a
that
great
stood out to
keynote,
me,
wasn't it?
amazing. And the one thing I remember, if he had a lot of great content on that presentation, but the one thing I remember was there's a shortage in our pipeline for talented engineers, and it's not fixing itself anytime soon. So then that leads into the discussion of headcount. Well, we don't need to reduce or give people the axe. We're simply trying to close that gap through technology. One of those being artificial intelligence. And my question to you, Brian, is what does an adaptable operating model look like in practice for a firm that wants AI embedded directly into its workflow? And then more importantly, what does that mean for its people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to go back to that one point, right? I've had a lot of conversations with firm leaders and firm owners about the use of AI in for their companies and adapting the use of AI. And with only one exception, right, has every single firm owner stated they do not want to reduce headcount. That's not their goal. It's so hard to find good people. They now have good people. The last thing they want to do is get rid of those good people, right? Many of them just genuinely love their team. They don't want to get rid of them, but they want to figure out how they can continue to grow, how they can continue to compete and make life easier for their team by the use of AI, right? It's much like, at a much smaller analogy, when the calculator came around, right? If you were doing hand calculations before that, why wouldn't you get a calculator and make life easier for your team, right? So I've only had one conversation where somebody was looking forward to cutting headcount. I'm not going to say who that was, but I want people to understand it's probably, I've had probably at least 250 conversations, and there's only one person that has said that, right? So I don't think we have to have a fear. I think it's the recognition that we have this tool that's coming along, and it's very broad to call AI a tool, but we have a tool that's coming along. Maybe it's a toolbox, maybe it's, a whole room full of tools that will help us alleviate some of the burden that currently exists and will continue to exist in our industry, that there is a shortage of engineers. And how can we do more with the engineers that we have in a way that they love doing it? Um, so back to your question, I think, for what I like to do in the conversations I'm having with firm owners is kind of figure out who their people are, what their strengths are. Again, back to what they love doing and are great at, what they don't love doing and are not great at. Map out their processes, So what are your existing processes? And I often tell people, when that was first asked to me by our business coach, I said, oh, well, we don't really have processes. And they said, oh, you have processes. Things get out the door. If things get out the door, you have processes. You just don't have them documented. Right. And then people, each little team does things a little bit differently. So let's document the processes, documenting the 20% of the process that gets the 80% of the results. Right. And then look at those processes, look at what the team does not love doing, is not great at, and figure out how we could delegate that to technology. And to me, that's the best way to not fully disrupt the workflow of the organization. Right. And how to keep it operating on the same business model, the same revenue model that they've had. And with little disruption, and then honestly seeing people, and we've seen it, where they then open their eyes like, oh, wow, this is great. How can we have more of this then? Okay. You're not looking to take away what I love doing and what differentiates me from any other organization. I had a conversation with a building owner, with a firm owner, talking about, the things that I didn't love doing and what I would have delegated to AI, and that was creating meeting minutes. And he said to me, oh, no, I love doing meeting minutes. And my answer to him was, great. You keep doing the meeting minutes because you're going to do a better job than AI would. Me, I would not do a better job than AI, right? But he's going to capture emotion. He's going to capture context of that meeting in a much better, much clearer way than I would. AI will do a better job than I would, right? So if I still had Sullivan Engineering, AI would be capturing all of our meeting minutes. For the meetings that I have for Gigbench, for Trinovate, AI takes all the meeting minutes. For that gentleman, he should still keep taking the meeting minutes and creating them because he's going to do a better job, and he should delegate something else to AI.
And then, I'm looking at my bookshelf here, Brian. So I've got your book, and I've got another book called Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick. Great read. And the title is so fitting because the more you work with it, the more you realize it really is a collaboration between human and machine. So to the gentleman who loves doing meeting minutes, right? Like, I'm sure there's something else he doesn't like, but through the process, he might find, hey, like, me plus AI is better at a task I love than either of us alone. So why not put our heads together and make it happen, right? Man and machine working together for a better outcome.
Absolutely. And I think, I'm not sure why it popped in my head, Nick, but it did as you were talking about that. You have suggested to me in a few of our conversations that I should stop typing to AI, right? And it is that co-intelligence kind of reminds us of that. Talk to it, speak to it like you would speak to a coworker or a colleague, and having a conversation with them, and the results are just transformational for me. So thank you for that tip and suggestion.
Absolutely. And, to anyone listening, right, no matter what AI or LLM you're using, there's usually in the bar where you type, there's a little mic. Just press it and start talking to the thing and see what happens. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised about how much it can do for you with very little input or otherwise.
Yeah, it's a great way to spend time in traffic in the car. We're going from northern New Jersey to Manhattan instead of listening to talk radio or, sports news, which sometimes is okay. But talking to a colleague like AI in a conversation like that has been a great tool for brainstorming.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to the audience, another great tip is voice mode for all of these systems. So, Brian's case, right, sitting in traffic, having a conversation with AI, capturing thoughts. When you get back to your desk, it's all cataloged for you, right? So you can pick up right where you left off. So
strong project outcomes need skilled managers and competent leaders. EMI's corporate training delivers expert-led courses in project management and people leadership, plus industry-recognized certification and exclusive premium content to take your team even further. Elevate your team's leadership capabilities today. Visit engineeringmanagementinstitute.org and click on corporate training.
So Brian, we've talked about a couple of use cases. We've talked about employees. We've talked about firm leaders, right? Let's wrap it up all into one. So I know we've talked about this people process technology framework, and I think the logo behind you gets at the heart of that. Now, how should leadership teams align those three things, people, process, and technology? So AI becomes a strategic advantage instead of, I'll say, a science experiment, right? Because you can have somebody over here doing one thing, somebody over here using a different AI. But as you know, right, the firm and its people work best when you move as one unit. So can you talk to us a little bit about how you can combine all three to have firms be really successful?
Yeah, I think there needs to be guardrails in any organization on any process that's there, right? And whether that was, our operations process, our sales process, finance process, whatever it was, we had to put in and identify what the aspects of it were a must do and what there's a little bit of flexibility and a little room on, right? We need to give our teams a little bit of creativity, a little bit of room to think and breathe and add their own style and flair to things. But we also have to have guardrails on what that looks like as an organization. So if that's a document that's going out the door, what does that look like? If that's a software that's being used, if that's equipment, safety equipment on site, right? I think that's one that everybody clearly gets, right? Here's the safety equipment you're allowed to use. Yeah, that hard hat may look really cool, but we don't allow it in our organization because we don't find that it meets our standards, right? Has to be the same thing with documents that go out the door. It has to be the same thing with processes within the organization. And it has to be the same thing with any tool that's used, including AI. This is what we're allowed to use. Here's what we recommend you use. Here's a little bit more of where you're allowed to use. And besides that, if you hear of something new, because it is evolving so much, that we want our team to come to us and say, hey, my buddy that works at this other organization, they're using this. It sounds good. I went to a conference 2 weeks ago where they talked about this thing that's coming out. We should look at trying that. Absolutely. You want that to come in, but we don't want our teams going rogue and just trying things. And we certainly don't want it being used outside the firewall of our own internal protection that we set up for organizations, because that's really important, right? We want to protect our data. We want to protect what's coming into the organization. We want to protect what's going out from the organization.
Absolutely. And Brian, speaking of data, so we keep hearing this recurring theme, right? Garbage in, garbage out. If you're a civil structural engineer, you've probably heard it since your first day in college, right? You throw bad data into an analysis program, guess what? You're going to get garbage out. So it's the same idea with AI, but what role does clean operational data, talking about project metrics, workflows, utilization tracking, what role does that play in making AI effective?
Yeah, I think it's vital, right, to have correct data going in. We all know that. You go all the way back to our college days when we were running calculations that were 4 or 5 and 6 pages. If you started with the wrong number or the decimal in the wrong spot, you were going to end up with the wrong answer, right? And that goes the same way now. If you have bad data going in, it's going to be bad data coming out. So having clean operational data is incredibly important. The more of it we have, the better off we are, right? AI is an incredibly strong tool for running calculations, for pulling all data together, running analysis. So the more data we have for it, the better. But it does have to be cataloged correctly. It does have to be in a usable format for AI, right? I know many people have old documents that they want to scan and they want to bring in to use an AI, which is great. Sometimes they have data that was scanned 10 years ago as a PDF and is in a non-readable format. That's not really very helpful. Right now it has to get transferred. And I am not a techie by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of people know how to say this word, but I know how it's been explained to me. And that data has to be in a format that's usable for AI user. We can't just upload it all and hope for the best and assume that it's grabbing everything that we wanted it to grab.
Absolutely. And if you're any organization that's been around for a little bit, you might have multiple versions of something floating around that's a critical document to your organization. Well, if AI ingests it all or ingests the wrong version. So there's certainly a piece of let's say data cleanliness, and it doesn't have to be as complicated as it sounds. It may just be picking out Brian, you talked about the 80-20 principle, those few things that really make the org run and just getting those right.
100%. Some time invested in what documents do we actually want to upload rather than let's incorporate everything is really time well spent. And then there's always, the little things like, back in the 90s, our organization used to have project numbers that were numbered this way. And then in 2004, they decided to change the project numbers or the project naming convention this way, right? Okay, just like you would explain it to an employee, you need to explain it to AI and not just upload it all and assume that AI is going to figure it out, right? Little transitions like that, we have to explain to AI. That time is really, really well spent up front.
Absolutely. The more context, the better. But now, Brian, as we know, right, there are some things that AI cannot currently do today. Right, we can't let's say affordably or socially acceptably get a robot to hang off the side of a building, right, to do an inspection. So there's still going to be a need for people, right? As we said before, there will always be a need for people, but in some instances, firms just can't find the talent quickly enough. So talk to me about your thoughts on flexible talent strategies, right? Elastic or freelance experience, and how that strengthens a firm's ability to innovate without extending their fixed overhead, right? Because we're not talking about hiring someone permanently, having them on the payroll forever. We're just talking about a temporary solution to a problem.
Absolutely. As a firm owner of a small but fast-growing firm and a relatively new firm, when I ran Sullivan Engineering, we had problems in various areas of bringing talent on board, right? Hiring people with a significant amount of experience, 30 years, 35 years of experience, was really hard to do for a firm that was 5 years old or even 10 years old. It was hard to recruit those people. It also would have been really hard to afford them. But those people exist, and they are willing to share their wisdom, to share what they've learned on the soft skills on the engineering side, and learn and share their technical knowledge as well. Many of them are looking at this phase of retirement as being kind of a semi-retirement, where they'll kind of move down south, get out of this cold northeast weather that we have up in the winters or northwest winters, and get down south, right? And kind of transition, but still bring value to organizations. We often, on a second note, we often had opportunities in geographic areas that were a challenge to pull people from New York City or Boston and ship them, have them fly to, the Midwest or Chicago to look at a building and do an inspection, when clearly there was people in those areas that had the talent and the ability to do the work that we wanted. We just weren't ready to commit to a full-time hire at that point, and we weren't the type of firm that was going to hire them full-time and only keep them for a couple of months. That's not how we operated. That's not how most firms operate, right? But we didn't have a way that we could find that help for us and trust what we were finding.
Absolutely. And I know that you've got something in the works to help solve that issue for firms. You want to talk a little bit about what you guys have been working on?
Absolutely. So we have a platform called GigBench that is connecting freelance engineers and architects with firms that are looking to hire them. So it's in beta format right now. We've got a select group of users on there. It's going well from the start. We've got really strong interest in various industries throughout engineering and architecture and through various geographies throughout the country. And what we're seeing is very interesting. Is we're finding that there's a lot of people that fit that first demographic I was talking about, that semi-retired group that really wants to bring the value, really wants to share their wisdom, and wants to transition into retirement, which is awesome. We're also seeing a lot of younger, early career people, not straight out of school, but early in their career, who are looking for a little bit of flexibility to maybe travel, but also a little more control in their career of the type of project that they're working on. They want to get experience on specific projects, specific types of projects, and they want to get it as quickly as possible, and they want to have a little more control of their career, so they want to be in that freelance. And then the part that's surprising me is seeing a little bit recently more mid-career people coming into the platform. I thought that would be hard to do because there's such a shortage of them, but we're seeing some people in their mid-career coming into the platform to work as freelancers, to be involved and kind of bring that back, whether it's people transitioning back from maternity or paternity leave, or people that just also at this point in their career want to make a transition into freelance work, want to make a transition into potentially entrepreneurship for themselves, to start their own solopreneur organization, and want to step into it. And they're finding that GigBench is that right opportunity for them. We're seeing an incredible amount of interest from firms of all sizes. I initially could see why a small firm would like it because I ran a small firm. Immediately saw interest from large, very, very large firms who were interested in helping, finding short-term temporary help. And then, of course, now we're seeing, the medium-sized organizations coming into it as well, and helping them with geographic growth as they jump into new cities, new markets within their niche, or helping them jump into new niches that they want to get into, different areas of expertise. And then the large firms, it's just helping to backstop their existing teams as they grow in different markets.
And it sounds like there's something for everybody, Brian, from both the, let's say, like the freelancer side or the firm side. And you guys are basically playing a little bit of matchmaker here.
That's exactly what we're doing. And it goes back to something that I've always just really enjoyed doing. And when I had Sullivan, I was always trying to connect, if I knew this good elevator contractor and I knew a good client who happened to have a lot of elevators and didn't love their elevator contractor, I was always trying to connect them, right? Try to help. I want good people to meet good people and find that qualified help. So it's always something that I've loved doing. And then now just looking at how do we do that within our industry, which needs it desperately, quite honestly. The trends are headed there. So we're not trying to change the trends of the industry. The industry is headed in a direction where there will be more freelance. Right now, according to some of the latest statistics, we're looking at about 3 to 5% of our industry is handled via freelance employment. And they're looking at that number changing to 20% within the next 10 years, even shorter than that. So we're just trying to help that be done in a responsible way. Most of what I'm hearing is people are finding freelance help through word of mouth. We are looking to do that in a way where we're finding vetted, qualified help that's built on trust through user review process. And right now it's only in the United States.
Very cool. So, and I mean, and it's not that it's that different than word of mouth. I think it just sounds to me like an extra layer of security, knowing that individual has been vetted, right? They're legit. You can see maybe even, just like reviews, work product, whatever the case may be, to help you, reassure yourself that, hey, we are getting the right person in the right seat here temporarily.
100%. And I was having a conversation with someone the other day about this, and I haven't figured out how to articulate it well, but it is still kind of word of mouth. Just the mouth is Geekbench, and there's a lot more mouths, right? So we're building this network where it is a trusted network that people are coming in, they're vetted. It is kind of on that, and it's even more transparent than, my buddy, the elevator contractor, right? It's, okay, who else have they worked for? What have they done? What do their reviews look like? What does their history look like? And are they actually a licensed engineer and architect in those states? Do they actually have the bachelor's degree that they say on some of the other platforms they do have it? We're vetting for that to make sure that that's all accurate.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, right, like Google reviews. So you go and say, hey, I want to try this new restaurant. A friend referred me to it, and I can go look. Oh yeah, 4.7 stars with 1,000 reviews, and I can keyword search, right? And in your guys' case, like, you can go through a clearinghouse, make sure the degree is legit, right? List a license number that individual can look up themselves, or maybe you guys are saying, hey, we already did that legwork for you. It doesn't sound to me like it's that far off from consumer products that we all already use today.
Exactly. And trying to do it in a way, though, that is more specific to the engineering and architecture, right? And using language that we as engineers and architects understand. But I think when we put our information out on generic platforms, social media platforms, or whatever it might be, we kind of tone down some of our vernacular, right? Whereas here, it's, feel free to speak the language, feel free to speak like a mechanical engineer would speak, and be really specific about your expertise and your experience, because the firms will understand that, and that's what they want to see. So that's what we're trying to do, is just make it really specific and allow it to be a much faster process for engineering firms and architects to find freelancers, and for freelancers to find opportunities that they would want to go after.
And Brian, my next question here, I think we'll tie it all together. So we talked about earlier innovation as a means of, hey, it's not just technology, it's not just AI, it's innovation. Because in the case of what you're doing with Geekbench, that's, yes, like it's a technology platform, but the real innovation is connecting people in a way that we're already doing, just more efficiently and more benefit to both parties. So my question to you is, what tends to surprise firm leaders about the cultural shifts required when they move from just reactive, sporadic use of technology to intentional innovation strategy? Because, like I just mentioned, innovation can be anything. And we've talked about AI, we've talked about connecting people. So what are you hearing from firm leaders? Like, what are the realizations they're making as you're having these conversations with them?
I think one of the realizations is so many of us are making is that we look at innovation for the products we design, right? And we look at innovation for how can we do this best for our client. And we don't often take the time to look at innovation, how we can do best for our business, right? And where can we bring? We're a little bit slow to adapt that. I think we as an industry can be a little slow to adapt how we can bring innovation into our business into the lives of our team. And I think there's so much talk about disruption of an industry that we look at innovation as somewhat being harmful for our team or disrupting our office, and not looking at it as a way, well, this is going to make life a lot easier for people and make them a lot happier, right? And so shifting that mindset, I think, has been a big transformation for people, whether I'm having conversations with them about Trinivate Advisors or having a conversation with them about Geekbench, where it takes a little bit and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait, this is going to make things a lot easier for our team. This is going to be a lot better. Even on the Geekbench side, I love the W-2 relationship, right? I had a lot of W-2 employees. Just about everyone on our team was a W-2. I love that. So you can go hire a freelance employee and then bring them on as a W-2. We're never going to prevent that. We love that. So thinking about it that way too, of, hey, when we wanted to expand into new geographic markets, one was North Carolina. We had enough work to keep someone busy for about 20% of the time. We can't really commit to hiring somebody full-time if you could only give them 20% of the work in a remote area where you don't have someone that can help sell the work. But if we could have brought them on freelance, start building in some of the backfill work for it if that person wanted to come on full-time, right? So just changing the way we're thinking about our business and how we run our business and using innovation that way, I think is a little bit of a cultural shift for firm leaders and firm owners, not just to think about how we can use innovation for the betterment of our clients, but how can we use it for the betterment of our business, which then the clients benefit as well, right?
Absolutely. And Brian, keep it on the topic of firm owners. So our last question for you today. If firm leaders listening could do just one thing to strengthen project outcomes, their business, in your point of view, what is it?
It's a great question. I think my answer goes back to what we started with, is go to the people on the front lines and find out where their biggest pain point is. And they're going to have multiple, and choose the one you can solve the quickest. Choose the one you can solve the quickest, that you can solve the easiest, and solve it for them. And it's going to unlock so much in the team, trust from front lines to leadership, right? Value from leadership, looking at what they can do, and just buy-in from the organization, right? And then, so many things about it, retention becomes easier because it shows that leaders truly care about what people on the front lines are doing. It shows that they trust them. And then, recruitment becomes easier because they start telling their friends about what their organization is doing for them, to make their lives easier. I think often we look at, what's going to be the best return on investment financially, when let's just go get a quick small win. Let's start moving in that direction. It builds a lot of energy from the team, builds a lot of loyalty. Because it makes them happier and it makes their lives easier.
Really well said. And I think, right, like when you get into the traditional AEC metrics, not every hour is the same, right? And I think we've talked about this, Brian, right person, right seat, energy. Are they doing the work that they love? Do they feel supported? So yeah, like every hour maybe build out at the same amount or track the same for utilization, but we absolutely know that time spent can differ from hour to hour, person to person, based on a number of different factors. So great answer, and I really appreciate you sharing that point of view.
Yeah, well said. Well summed up, Nick. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, Brian, again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. If the audience wants to connect with you, ask you more questions, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. Two good email addresses to go with, Brian at trinovate.ai, trinovate.ai, or Brian at Gigbench, gigbench.com.
Brian, thank you again so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you, Nick. This was fantastic. Really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Until next time.
Yep, absolutely.
Please remember, you can find the show notes for this episode at aectechpodcast.com. There, you'll find a summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during this episode. Until next time, I wish you the best in all your engineering and technology endeavors.